Coming up, a break from the Summer League conversation to refresh our stance on why some of the big NBA trades like Rudy Gobert or Dejounte Murray have clouded the packages required to get Kevin Durant from Brooklyn and could stall trade conversations well beyond the summer. We break that down and a potential opportunity to still entice KD to stick around right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen today, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, as we said at the top, we got some time here. Next Summer League game is not on the docket until Tuesday night. We'll, of course, be looking at that and breaking it down. Got plenty of feedback from fans about how we felt about Cam Thomas and talking about the first two games. But we have an opportunity here to reflect on some of the big movement in this NBA offseason and how it really is impacting what the Nets may want to do.
Yeah, fans were hashtag not happy with some of the camp things. I guess we could talk
clear caveats. We gave very clear caveats around.
I will say we didn't say one negative thing about Cam. If you want to take, he's the same player, and I have nothing more. I have not much more to learn about him. Like that was what we said. You can listen back to it. I know that sometimes all out praise, things that short of all out praise sound like all out derision. That's just like simply not the case. It was kind of like, hey, we just haven't learned a ton. We kind of knew this about him. Okay, great. It's like, that was nothing bad. Anyway, that's not what we're going to talk about today. Because I do think that, we're going to talk about the KD, not a ton of news has come out about the KD trade or lack thereof, but I think we did want to kind of talk about how it's probably like a primer for the rest of the summer, right? To be like, I don't think we should expect much in the way of movement on this really the rest of the summer, to the point where we might have to we'll probably end up having to find other things to talk about. We'll kind of break down why, but I think you kind of agree with me on this one, that the rest of the trade market has probably in a lot of ways killed a lot of chances for for a potential Durant trade to happen.
Yeah, we're going to go into it. Mentioned, the Rudy Gobert trade, obviously massive haul there. Even Murray going from the Spurs, obviously, to the Hawks. And yeah, I think, different off seasons hold different trade scenarios that play themselves out. And maybe in a vacuum, if nothing else had happened this off season, who knows what the standard would have been when Kevin Durant requests the trade, right? All of a sudden it's a blank canvas. Or even if these trades happened after Kevin Durant got moved, and there was a little bit of, I'm sure, from Brooklyn Nets fans and probably from us of saying, whoa, look what these guys just went for. They've made a huge mistake. Or the asking price would have dropped significantly for Rudy Gobert, right? So it's funny to think about how the Brooklyn Nets have had a tumultuous, up and down, chaotic last few seasons. Then this offseason ratchets it up to a whole new level. And this feels like it just throws another wrinkle into what will end up being, I think, one of the historic non-championship contending sagas for NBA history that involves so much and yet involves so little to do with actual basketball games and winning.
Yeah, I mean, the harsh reality here is the second that Gobert trade was made between Minnesota and Utah, that might have been like the kind of functional end of the Kevin Durant market when it came to trades. And I can lay out like sort of like the baselines of why that is. That trade, which involved Minnesota sending over Malik Beasley, that's a money thing, Patrick Beverley, money, Balmero, money, and then Walker Kessler, who was there this year's first-round draft pick, number 22. Let's just call that a first-round draft pick, right? Plus Jared Vanderbilt, young guy that you can kind of like have some thoughts on probably. Mm-hmm. And then 4 more first-round picks. So I'm going to call it 5 first-round picks because I'm going to count Kessler as a pick, and then 1 pick swap. The second that happened, the Kevin Durant I joked about it at the time. I said that, if Rudy Gobert is worth 5 first round draft picks, then Kevin Durant's worth 15 first round draft picks, right? Right. And it was kind of tongue in cheek, kind of not. But what I think we've realized since that trade was made is that if that crazy price for a 30-year-old, possibly declining Rudy Gobert, who's amazing on defense and has no real offense, if that's the baseline, there's not any team that can really meet that or is going to want to meet that now for Kevin Durant, right? And if you start throwing in the idea where the other team has to send back real players, they didn't send back any players. Like the Timberwolves sent back players for a team that's going to try to probably tank here, right? Like if you add the draft equity or draft capital with a player or two, I don't see how anyone meets that price. And I want to talk more about it, but like just on a high level, now that we've had a couple weeks to kind of dissect that, or a week and a half, I just don't see. I actually think that that's what everyone's going to look back on. It's not going to be most teams can't come anywhere near that price, and all parties involved just aren't going to be able to do it. Does that make sense? Like on that level, to say like this is where I think we actually have a real clear comp to say, oh man, if that was the price for Gobert, the Durant thing might just not get done.
Well, this is the interesting thing to me, because if 5 first-round picks, as you say, including a talent that was taken this year, okay, and then a couple of pieces to make money. The interesting thing to me is, where does everyone fall on the spectrum of the value chart, right? We talked about Toronto. Yes. What is OG? Is he worth 2 first-round picks on the market? 3 first-round picks? 2 first and a player, right? Like, what is his value? A guy like Scotty Barnes, the great debate. The Toronto fan base will never let him go in a trade, but the Brooklyn Nets would automatically demand that he be a part of it. What is his value? He's 20 years old. We think the ceiling is all there in front of him, but is he worth 5 first-round picks? Right? Like that's, I think, the one part of this, because the Gobert trade did not involve any players of real value, because even when you take a first-round pick, hasn't been on the court yet, so you don't know what that player is going to be at. So there's still, I think, some wiggle room inside of that. The bigger question now becomes, can player value ever correlate to what the Brooklyn Nets are establishing as, this is Kevin Durant, and we know exactly what he is when he plays basketball, and you need to meet standard X. Like that is, I think, what's fascinating about it. So it doesn't help anything. I maybe still think that there's an opportunity to accomplish it, but then we really get into the further conversation of what are the teams that are interested and capable of even putting those players and that value on the table for Brooklyn, even to start a conversation, right?
Right. Oh, yeah, completely. And look, here's the thing. I get what you're saying. I understand what you're saying about like Scotty Barnes is worth more than 2 potential or 3 potential like Minnesota picks into the future, right? I get that. Mm-hmm. I think you do too. This is why there was worlds where I was like, hey, Barnes and OG, and we're pretty close, right? Like,
right. Yes.
There's but I think 1, I'm in the minority there. 2, or we're in the minority if you agree with me. 2, it was Barnes plus OG plus like salary filler. I think we're in the minority there. And when you have a deal that's so far above market value, which I think the consensus is that was on the Gobert trade, is that like there was such a drastic overpay on the part of Minnesota with all these picks that even not sending back players, it's still totally skewed the market, because the overpay on that was so harsh that every trade now is going to be compared to that one. Just like before, every trade was compared to the AD trade or, to the Drew Holiday trade or things like this. This is the new trade. That's the new baseline. And it's going to be really hard for the Nets or really the Nets to be the next team that makes a trade after that trade, because the timing, and I'll tell you why in a second. I'm going to tell you about Bill Barr here, but like coming up after this, I'll explain to you why it actually, of all people, it has Sean Marks in a totally impossible situation. Like this is actually the biggest problem. Going to talk to you about it in a second. First, we're going to talk to you about Built Bar. We've been telling you about Built Bar forever. They invented the best tasting protein bar on the market with the stats to back it up. Maybe you tried the coconut brownie chunk Built Bar. We tried that one. Look, we've told us about this. When this stuff comes in the mail, because our friends at Built Bar are constantly hooking us up, people in our house just go running for it. I have extended family that comes running for it now. Ask me like when have more Built Bars come in, because I made the mistake of sharing it with them once. So now I can't just take them for myself. That's because Built Bar absolutely backs it up with the stats after you know that it's good for you. The low calorie, low sugar, high protein, all super delicious. They got that coconut brownie, but they got it in the puffs as well. These are chocolate covered puffs that just basically mirror what's happening with the protein bar, except they're just kind of like a little bit better when you come into snacking. That's what Built Bar wants to do. They want to make it super easy, super healthy for you. You go to built.com right now. Use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off of your order. Use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off at built.com.
Okay, so as you said it there, because I'm not gonna I don't want to steal too much of your thunder, but
you can just say we probably have the same idea, yeah.
Because the problem is now here it's like if you say well everyone around the league agrees, what a big overpay by the Timberwolves to get Rudy Gobert, and we're not all gonna hold to that standard. Okay, fine, except if you're a team that has a singular talent in NBA history and he's just requested a trade, where now Sean Marks is the GM for the Brooklyn Nets. Okay, great. We all agree that was an overpay. So what, Sean? Don't you come trying to use that as a comp for what you need to get Kevin Durant off the roster, right? Like now, if anything short of 4 or 5 first-round picks and maybe some players, right, or the combination there within, is going to leave Sean Marks in the eyes of the fan base, in the eyes of maybe the general NBA public, not in our eyes, because as I said, you and I are, I think, in the minority on what it should look like to get fair value for Kevin Durant. But most are going to look at Sean Marks and say, what have you done? You have disastrously not only traded Kevin Durant, but you also took back pennies on the dollar for a singular talent.
Or just in the eyes of the owner too. Like you got to sell these trades to ownership also. And now it does seem like Cy, from his comments, is sort of on board with letting Durant go. You know, talking about wants to see guys that want to win. The insane statement of I'd rather have a 40-win team and like guys that play hard, which is like legit the worst thing you can hear from the owner. Like that is the worst thing you can hear from the owner. Like no one wants that. I know that's a little out of context.
I'd rather be the Thunder. What?
Well, at least there's a plan there. Like they're not going to do this forever. Like there's a plan to like hoard as many assets as possible and then, you know, make the leap once everyone's ready. And I know I took that a little out of context, but it wasn't like, it's not so far. So you got to sell it to ownership too. You got to sell it to the fan base. You were going to now be defined by this trade going forward. Like it's a miracle. Frankly, in some ways it's a miracle that he still has the job based on sort of how this has gone with the players. Like more other organizations would have cut bait on this a long time ago in favor of KD and Kyrie. I think it would have been hard to attract new talent into the GM position if you knew you were just going to be at the whim of a superstar wanting out. But even with all that said, and even with, I think, a decent amount of goodwill that Marks has built up over the years, and I think signing KD and Kyrie still has to be on his resume. And like I think trading for Harden, I still count that as like a positive on his resume. So I know not everyone does, but now what happens next will be defined. And it would be so hard for Sean Marks to go back and be like, I'm the guy who took effectively less back for Kevin Durant than Utah got for Rudy Gobert. So even starting there, you can't do it. You cannot do it. As a GM, you would never be able to look. I mean, I assume it would be very difficult to look other GMs in the eyes and like have you take you seriously if you just took complete pennies on the dollar to start, and then even a more effective pennies on the dollar once you compare it to the Gobert trade. And this is what I mean. Like Minnesota did no one any help here. Like no one has helped. I mean, I'm not even sure Minnesota's that helped by this, but Utah wins, but everyone else kind of loses. Like the landscape now, someone else has to bite the bullet on making a trade that's worse, like has less value going out from Rudy Gobert to be the first one to do it. And I just don't see Sean Marks being the one that wants to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the patience piece around this, right? See if anything else happens here. Can another trade happen over the course of the summer that then adjust how you look at that value chart for Gobert. But again, you need big names to move here. It can't be that Russell Westbrook gets traded and you go, wow, there you go. Look, Russ got traded. He was worth 47 million. Now we have a baseline there. So I think you do bring up Joe Tsai, and to your point, out of context on his comments around it. But if Sean Marks is going to make it through this, if the Nets are going to make it through this, then there is that out of, we understand we are moving on from this iteration and version of the team. And it's more about the totality of what we get back in return through everything we're going to do. Moving Kevin Durant, moving Kyrie Irving, maybe moving Ben Simmons, right? Like there is this big picture idea that I am selling Sean Marks to Joe Tsai around how this will look going forward. And yes, when you look back and go on the one-to-one, we're going to lose. We're going to lose because, by the way, we're going to lose on a Kyrie Irving trade too, right? Because this is a guy whose value is probably at his quote unquote lowest that it's ever been relative to where the market is. There's not a lot of teams that are interested in taking him on. So all of these factors start to tumble down in the wrong direction for Brooklyn. And I know I want to get into this possibility around, with all of this information seemingly stacked up against the Brooklyn Nets, is there an alternative route here, at least in the short term? But we mentioned at the top, Dejounte Murray. Reiterate the package that he went to Atlanta for, because that doesn't necessarily help the circumstance either.
Yeah, for sure. We can sum that up here. And it's pretty, and I will say the Murray thing is a little different. The age is different. He's a lot younger than Gobert. The contract the contract was much more palatable. He made a lot less money than Gobert. He's a little more cost controlled to that standpoint. So that's why like this package doesn't look that different from the Gobert piece. It was Danilo Gallinari, a first round pick next year, a 25 and that's from Charlotte. And then a 2025 first round pick, and then a pick swap, and then another first. So let's say 3 firsts and Danilo Gallinari plus a swap for Dejounte Murray, and then Landale went on that also. So this one is another one where it's like, okay, well, 3 first rounders, no real players got sent back because Gallo basically got put on waivers, and then he got picked up by the Celtics. So. And that one's like, he's younger. Maybe he's like not as good as Gobert. It's like a little different. Maybe it's a little
proven. Right.
Yeah, right. But that's still like a pretty big package. Like 3 firsts for Dejounte. I think that's more than what most people thought they were going to get. And so this one probably doesn't help either. But this one was a little more realistic because the age was he's so much younger, right? Mm-hmm. Like Murray's only 25. And so Durant's 34. And so even that alone is gonna mean that you just get more back with assets, and Gobert's 30, right? So like even that alone is gonna mean you get more back with assets because you're still getting a young player back, right? You're getting a guy under contract that is like friends with Trae Young, and that kind of sweetened the pot a little bit too. But like that situation, even that one didn't disrupt it as much because again, like Murray doesn't track the same way Gobert tracks. Like Gobert, like, is on the same age piece, right? The contract is still up there. And so that's where I take that back. Dejounte hasn't re-signed. He was at 15.5 this year, and then they're going to re-sign him. So my bad. I misspoke there. Either way, you're not paying him as much this year. It's unlikely he's going to sign.
The money's going to get spent.
I don't think he'll sign like a total max. Like Gobert was essentially on a max, right? So I just don't think I think this is a long way to say, I think the Gobert comp is much closer to Durant than Dejounte Murray is. There's just like too many other differences with Murray. And that was still a pretty big package. Like 3 firsts, that's a lot. That's just a lot of draft capital to give up just to start.
Well, then, so let's just, before we get into this possible opportunity for Brooklyn and just resetting how things look, because I want to pose the somewhat desperate question, but just quickly, in that sliding scale then, though, but to your point, Gobert is younger than Durant. Now, he's not Durant, but he certainly is a proven commodity. Murray, okay, he's much younger. Okay, so we're looking at these packages. You're talking about 3 firsts and a swap. You're talking about 4 picks and a player that was taken in the first round. Like the big factor that rolls into all this too is you have to have first round picks every other year. So teams that you're also dealing with are limited to this construct of how much we can send your way, let alone if we're capable or willing to do it. But what is you said we're in the minority. What is the pick number? If any team out there is going to give a quality player back and then another subsequent player that at least has some value, how many picks have to be added in a trade for Kevin Durant? Like, what is your number?
I definitely want to get into that because I think that is, again, a little bit of a sliding scale, but I think I have a number that we can probably round in on here in a second. We'll take a quick break and then we'll come back with like an actual package should look like. All right. So when we're talking about, I will say, I think the Nets would have come close to taking back before the Gobert trade. I think they actually might have considered this package from Minnesota, right? Like this would have been getting close, and maybe it's like DeAngelo Russell instead of, and maybe it's Russell instead of one at like Beverly or something like that to make the money work, right?
By the way, there had even been that speculation that the Brooklyn Nets were in conversations post Gobert trade with the Minnesota Timberwolves centered around a cat trade for a Kevin Durant, where it was like, well, we'll take cat, we'll take the big cat, we'll bring him to Brooklyn, and then we'll try to compile some of other assets that you have there. And that started to fall apart already when we talk about the speculative thing. So continue.
Right. So I think that like that probably would have been something they might have actually considered. It's like, I'm not a huge fan of DeAngelo Russell here. Like, I don't think he's going to make the team great. So whatever. But if you got all those, if you're like, hey, we got DeAngelo Russell back, maybe a Jared Vanderbilt, a couple of these other like little pieces and 5 picks, I think the Nets actually would have accepted that offer or thought about it. Right. Like now you got this other part where you got to convince Katie to actually go to these places, which is the other freaking fly in the ointment. Like he's got to be, we didn't even get into this part. Like we're trying to just keep it like within the trade scenario here. But I think they actually would have considered that. Like, and I wonder what my reaction would have been. It probably would have been great, but I'm like, hey, a bunch of draft picks. Maybe you can make the play in, you'll win some games and we start to reset. But now, and I know I'm not answering your question yet, but let's start there. Like, would you have accepted that deal? I'm not going to do it through the trade machine. I know this would have come close. DeAngelo Russell, Patrick Beverly, Jared Vanderbilt, 5 picks. And for Kevin Durant straight up, would you have started? Well, how would you have felt if Woj tweeted something like that out? We know it's not going to, but like, let's say that was the case.
Right. I completely reset my mind before anything else happened this offseason. And I'm only thinking
wipe the Gobert thing from your mind. Yes.
And I'm only thinking about, and all I'm thinking is 5 first-round picks for Kevin Durant. You know what? That's a hole that you can rebuild this team with, right? It's not about the Nets want to get back superstar talents that they can put in their young core. Yeah. Like, I get a functional point guard, like you said, DeAngelo Russell. It doesn't overexcite me. I've always liked Vanderbilt. I think he's a nice piece, right? And you get a veteran. But the big piece would be I'm getting all the draft capital. This is resetting the clock on my franchise. It's wiping away what we lost in the Houston trade. And now we get to go forward, understanding these aren't going to be perfect assets when whatever team you send Kevin Durant to. But, hey, it's a baseline that tells me this organization can start to get itself back on track, maybe a little bit quicker than it would otherwise. So, I mean, it would at least be a conversation. I wouldn't be wiping it away. But to your point, now here we sit where everyone's saying, it's got to be OG and Barnes and Trent Jr. and it's got to be 3 or 4 first-round picks, which I, again, objectively think is just absolutely, it's insane because this is the other part that we can get into now. All of these trade scenarios, and I want to get into this specific one that involves maybe the Nets taking a little bit of a risk here going into the season. But all of these trade scenarios, I don't care how good Kevin Durant is, and he's amazing. Teams cannot afford to strip their roster to the bone to get Kevin Durant. It doesn't make sense. And you can tell me Toronto, well, Van Fleet and Siakam and Kevin Durant, okay. And Birch, and you're still going to have Birch probably has to come to make the money work. You're still going to have Boucher. Okay, fine. But like, that's not necessarily a Eastern Conference Finals automatic winning and going to the NBA Finals. It's good, but you're telling a team, hey, we're going to take this window shot here for 1 or 2 seasons potentially, and then have to strip it down. Same thing with the Pelicans. Same thing with the Suns. Like all of these teams have different versions of it. I'm not saying it's completely off the table, but you have to at least accept the idea that other teams are looking and saying, and so is Kevin Durant, by the way. I like the idea of playing with OG and Siakam and Barnes, right? I don't like the idea of not playing with half of them because I'm now on the Brooklyn Nets. So I think that some of that involves everyone coming back to the table and accepting a little bit of reality, which also includes other teams accepting reality of maybe it's not OG and Scotty Barnes, but maybe it's Barnes and Trent Jr. that get the job done, Toronto. We get it. You love Scotty Barnes, but guess what? That's what it takes to get Kevin Durant.
Yeah, so I'll just go through a couple things, right? And we'll make this fast. Because some of this is repeating. Scotty Barnes plus OG plus 1 pick and some salary thing, I would probably do that. I think that's okay with me. It would look bad compared to the Gobert trade. I think we can all feel pretty good about the age reset and
I would do OG and Trent Jr. with capital as well. Like there's a lot of versions from Toronto.
I would need a lot of picks. I would need a lot of picks for that one.
Yep.
But this is where it all changes, right? Like Devin Booker and 2 picks for Kevin Durant, right? Like they're not going to do that, but maybe Devin Booker and 1 pick because you just reset the age so much, right? Like you go from a 34-year-old Durant to a 25-year-old Booker. Like these are big changes. You have to factor these things in.
Ingram and Herb Jones plus maybe, a pick or 2 from the Pelicans, that's been thrown out there. Yes, because I get younger. I get 2 young pieces for my team, right? So you can always frame these around these things, but I want to get to this though, because I find this to be fascinating.
Wait, one more thing about that. I want to say one more thing about that last piece and then go. And I'm going to, because I know the other trade that people are going to compare this to is the Anthony Davis trade, which I said before. Remember, Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart, to some degree, were not the same guys they are now when they got sent in that trade. They were young guys that you could kind of dream on, and they all kind of did pretty well, Ingram especially. But it was not totally clear that was the trajectory for those guys when they got traded, and LA shipped out all the picks. So Ingram now, because I know someone's going to say, well, they traded Ingram for Davis. Ingram was not the same guy like when they traded him for Anthony Davis. It's not the right comp. So, and I'm sure I know what's going to happen. We're going to get a million comments. They're going to say this isn't enough. I get it. I get it. Because everyone, this is the whole, just to reiterate, this is the whole point of the podcast. The whole point of the podcast is saying everyone is going to say that's not enough. And we're going to say, correct, it's not enough now because of the Gobert trade.
Right. Because of this.
Sorry, I know I cut you. I cut you off. No. So, but yeah.
And by the way, too, it's like, and that's something to keep in mind, though. In that trade for Anthony Davis, remember, it was on what these guys could be. So sometimes now when you're talking about, I want the 100% proven young commodities, you're going to have to maybe take some guys you can dream on a little bit. And that could be something you can get excited about over the next couple of seasons. The thing I wanted to get to here is, so we all know that things have fallen apart for the Nets organization. You have the opt-in from Kyrie, but ultimately seeks to sign and trade, etc. But one thing that we can get into more as we go forward is Donovan Mitchell, just as a player, to be involved in these conversations, because I think you and I agree that getting back point guard talent or backcourt talent is different than getting some of the length and size and talent when you're talking about reconfiguring your roster. It's why OG is so attractive. It's why Scotty Barnes is so attractive. And listen, the nuts and bolts of this could be off the mark here, but the framework idea of, and I added in an element just to make sure we clear the rookie extension piece of it. But if you sent Kyrie Irving out to the Lakers and you ended up putting Westbrook onto the Utah Jazz and you ended up putting Donovan Mitchell onto the Brooklyn Nets, and I know you got to get Ben Simmons off of there. So let's say he goes out to the Kings and the Nets take back De'Aaron Fox. It's just a money piece. Okay, fine. The point here being, if you can move Kyrie Irving to the Lakers and avoid taking back Westbrook, Donovan Mitchell maybe becomes a very attractive possibility to say, hey, Kevin Durant, we're going to have to wait to see what this market is going to do, and it may take into the season. And in the meantime, you could just consider the idea of what it might be like to start playing basketball with a Donovan Mitchell and with some of the young players that we have here. And there'd be other pieces that would be involved in this. The Nets would still get back maybe some capital, depending on how things go with Ben Simmons. But I do wonder, do you think that that's a risk worth taking here of, if you already alienated Kevin Durant, why not facilitate the move to get Kyrie Irving off, try to get some talent back in on the roster, and then say, hey, Kevin, just saying, summer's ending, season's starting to loom here. Are you going to potentially sit out waiting for that trade, or can we maybe give you a sample size here as the last-ditch effort?
Yeah, I think we're going to reach. I can't comment on that specifically in terms of like value. Mitchell's 25. We've seen what he can do. He's really, really good. He's definitely not the best player on a championship team.
That I wouldn't want if I'm not trying to sustain my relationship with Kevin Durant. Yeah.
But I think that very question around this is what, like, even just asking that question about like having Durant consider this stuff is just this other reason we're going to see this just go on for months, because I think the Nets are going to try these scenarios of like, let's just run it back. Let's see what happens. What if we bring this guy in? What if we do this? Like, would that change your mind at all? There's no market. Like, I think it's going to all be that.
and let me be really clear. Like, I don't believe that running it back with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons, I don't think that is feasible for a myriad of reasons, and for personal perspectives. I don't think that should be the route that the Brooklyn Nets ultimately go. But I do think there is the route where you take the first step with Kyrie, and then you see if you can drag it out and maybe turn the corner with Durant.
It would be really interesting to like play a little, because at this point, what do you have to lose? To play a little another game of chicken and be like, we're just trading Kyrie. That's what we thought that was fair. We don't think what's fair, this other stuff is fair for you. That would be super interesting to see what would happen next. I'm sure it would go terrible, but I will say the two guys already know or already seem okay with the idea that they're not playing together anymore, at least for next year. That part does seem to be known and accepted, right? Like it's funny. Kyrie has never actually said that he wants to trade and wants out, correct? Like that's never been.
Well, he was granted permission to seek a sign and trade, so there'd be no reason to think that was granted by the Nets unless Kyrie Irving.
But he has not demanded a trade. Like from what we can understand, Kevin Durant has demanded a trade, right, or has asked to be traded,
requested.
Kyrie requested. Pretty pleased with sugar on top. But Kyrie has not. Like the Kyrie, it's so funny about how these two guys have become so packaged together at this point. And look, there's clearly Kyrie conversation, so it's not. This isn't like smoke with no fire. Mm-hmm. But I guess we do have to say and just admit that Kyrie, for what we can tell, signed this player option and has not indicated that he was not going to that he was going to sit out or needed a trade. Like he's never said any of those things.
Well, by the way, and of the two, but Kyrie is the far more visually making himself available on the West Coast now. And, we're doing this before the summer league games where he could be hanging out with Kevin, with LeBron James potentially. It seems like he's sending more of the in public signals that he's done with the Brooklyn Nets, whereas Kevin Durant has verbalized it. And yet, for the most part, like his personality is just kind of staying, away from the fray of potential speculation. It's fascinating.
Well, he did tweet out that one picture of a bird flying out of a cage, which made it super clear. If you had seen my eyes at that point, they rolled completely 180 degrees into the back of my head.
They came back front though. They came all the way back around 360 and came right back.
I just couldn't have rolled my eyes anymore and stuff like that. Anyway, whatever. We somehow figured out a way to get Kyrie. Anyway, point being, it doesn't seem like Kyrie's ever asked for a trade, and Gobert killed the trade market for Durant. So see you in September. Now, we're gonna obviously talk more about October. We're gonna talk more about this over the course of the summer. We'll see what happens at Summer League. We'll be back on after the Summer League game to break down some more of that action. Again, the Summer League games have been fun. Please go back and listen to what we said about Cam Thomas to know that we were not dragging him. Although I guess maybe I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. Anyway, in the meantime, make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. Subscribe over on YouTube as well. Leave a comment. Good, bad, indifferent. We just love the comments. Really appreciate the feedback. Have seen the numbers only grow over on YouTube. So go check us out there. Subscribe. There you go. I got there. Subscribe to YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts.
And of course, it began as a mystery and it will end as a mystery. But what a savage and beautiful country that lies in between. Diane Ackerman.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. R.I.P. Not sure. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.